I think we're getting to a point where people are starting to understand what thinking differently and communicating differently and processing differently means, beyond just the challenges, and that there's actually a lot of goodness that comes from folks who are wired this way.
Welcome to Matters of Soul Importance, where we dive deeply into topics of both earthly and eternal consequence. I'm Roxanne Solonin, faith columnist and features writer for The Forum, author, and speaker. My guest today, Todd Charette, first crossed my path through, of all places, Facebook. The first connection came through his posts about introversion. As a fellow introvert who had written a series about the topic on my blog several years ago, I appreciated finding someone who understood and wrote about this affliction. But soon the conversation turned in another direction when Todd mentioned in April 2023 that he was part of a neurodiversity awareness effort in the human resources department of his company. Neurodiversity is fascinating to me, he said. So much time has been put into the challenges of those who are neurodivergent, but not as much into the superpowers that we have. We just received a neurodivergent diagnosis within our family, and I was eager to begin learning more about how to address the different ways neurodivergent brains work in as helpful a way as possible. It was important to me to have met someone that not only understood something about living with a neurodiverse brain, but who had struggled through that with faith as a guide. I had a feeling Todd could offer me something from his experience that would be helpful to me. As I shared some of my own challenges with him, Todd offered to pray for me, and I extended the same back. I'd loved it when he'd said that as Christians, we're all called by God to bring him our suffering while sharing our gifts with the world. What better way to do that than to highlight the very special neurodiverse? Todd and I agreed to stay in touch and maybe even collaborate on a project together. When I received an assignment from a national publication to write on the topic of neurodiversity and faith, I had hoped to bring Todd into that piece as a resource, but the timing didn't work out. We reconnected recently with Todd updating me, saying he'd recently been diagnosed with both ADHD and being on the autism spectrum. When the idea of doing a podcast episode came up, Todd gratefully accepted my invitation, and I'm excited to hear more about his journey today in a way that I feel confident will turn into a blessing for others. So with that, it's time to meet Todd Charette. Well, welcome, Todd, to Matters of Soul Importance. It's so great to be with you today. Thank you for agreeing to have a chat with me this morning.
Thank you, Roxanne. It's great to talk to you too, and share my journey and my experiences with you and with everyone else.
Yeah, well, I've really, I don't know, I don't even know how we connected. It was probably like through mutual friends on Facebook, but I really enjoyed your posts. They were really refreshing and funny. And at first there was a lot about introverts, and I'm an introvert, although some of my friends contest that, but they don't understand what a true introvert is, which is someone who gets their energy from being away from people.
Right.
And I'm a people person, but I can only, do that so much. I have to temper my interactions each day. If I have too many, I need to go into my little hole and shut down. And
Yes.
So I am a true introvert, and I think most of my family is too. So anyway, I really appreciate your little introvert jokes and little things that you share on Facebook. But then we also connected on this topic of neurodiversity. So today we're going to ask the question, what gifts do the neurodivergent bring to God's kingdom? But before we get into the meat of it, I just want to get to know you a little bit. So
Sure.
Mainly I've gotten to know you through Facebook, but and I know that you live in New Hampshire, and that's it. I don't know anything about how you grew up. And other than that, you're a practicing Christian Catholic. I don't know a lot about your faith journey. So why don't we start? Give us a little picture of what it was like growing up as Todd in New Hampshire.
I'm happy to, Roxanne. So currently live in New Hampshire, a very small town, with my wife and my daughter. I know I've heard you joke before about you can judge the size of your town by how many streetlights you have. We actually have 0 streetlights right now, but one is coming. There's one that's being planned, so we'll at least have one stoplight soon. So we live here in the woods with all of God's creatures. We get to see bears and moose and all kinds of creatures on a regular basis. So it's a really peaceful place to live here in New Hampshire. I've been here most of my life, really since I was 7 years old. Grew up here. I have a younger brother, younger sister, and we really grew up in what I would call a secular family experience. Although both my parents were raised Catholic, they both, for different reasons, fell away from the church. I was baptized Catholic, but we never went to church. And I can remember even as a child asking my mom, like, can we go to church? I'm kind of curious because I have friends that, go to Baptist church or go to other denominations. I'm just always curious. And she just was never, for her own reasons, was never open to that. So I always grew up wondering why, wondering more about faith and my journey and wondering about God, always feeling a pull for more. But it wasn't until I was an adult that I started to do some searching and exploration. We visited, I feel like, every possible Christian denomination possible to see what felt like home. And we spent some time in the Episcopal Church. And we, like I said, we looked around for what felt right and true to us, and ultimately ended up in the Catholic Church in a way that really feels good to us as a family. That was fairly recently ago. So that was only just over 5 years ago that I converted fully or fully became Catholic. And since then have been all in. Like, I can't get enough of learning about the church, learning about church history and theology and philosophy. I'm actually in the process of working on a master's degree in divinity right now at Holy Apostles College too. So there's I jumped in and have become all about it.
That's so cool. So what was your wife's background? Did she have any Christian background?
She did, yeah. So she was raised Catholic as well, and then again, sort of as an adult, was sort of in and out of the church. So for her, it was really coming back to the Catholic Church as well.
Okay. What have been some surprises about your faith journey? It sounds like, as you were talking about that, it's like someone who's thirsty, and you finally found the well, the spring, and you just like can't get enough. You got to keep drinking that water down. What are some of the highlights of coming back to God in that way?
Yeah, it's that's a good question. Like it's been that itch that I've had, as I mentioned, ever since I was a kid. Like, I could actually, recently I was thinking about this. I can remember as a child being in the kitchen at the home we lived in here in New Hampshire, going to get a drink in the refrigerator and pouring myself a drink. It was probably high C or something like that. And wondering, where am I? What am I doing? How does this all, like, I'm getting a drink, but what's going on in the house next to me, or the city next to me, or the state, or the universe? Like, what are we all doing here? Is it just to be here, or is there some larger meaning? So even as a kid, I was always curious about the why, and I think that starts to get us into some of the neurodiversity as well. But finally finding sort of the answer, and having that journey go into the church, and having a deeper understanding of my faith in God. I don't wonder anymore. I feel like now I know and have a better understanding of why we're all here and how we all fit into the universe that God created.
So how old were you, did you say, when you were having that thought about?
I'm trying to think, Roxanne. I probably, I don't know, 8, 9.
Wow.
But I would always ask questions like that. I would be like,
Mm-hmm.
why are we here? And what does this mean? And I get people are going to work, and like, why? Like, there's always the kid that asked the 11 whys. But it felt deeper than that at the moment. And like I said, as I've now gotten older and found my way journey into the church, it has for sure helped with that why.
Now, I have a question. At age 8 or 9, did you actually pour it into a glass, or did you just guzzle it right from the pitcher?
It was probably, like, I'm trying to think, it was probably some sort of a Star Wars cup that I was probably pouring it into at the time. But
Yeah.
I don't think I ever drank right, because it was High C was in cans at that point, where
Oh,
you
okay.
sort of had to
Okay.
pop open the cans. So that probably would have been dangerous to drink out
Oh,
of.
okay. Yeah, true. Okay, well, enough of that side note. But okay, so you were a deep thinker, though.
Yeah.
I remember as a young child having the thought. I had very vivid dreams and imagination, and my parents were cautious about what they let me watch because of that.
Mm-hmm.
But I remember having the thought really young, like even younger than that, of is this a dream? Am I dreaming right now? Like what, I was trying to figure out what was real and what was my dream, because my dreams are so vivid. So I remember later mentioning that to my philosophy professor in college, and he said that preschoolers and toddlers are very philosophical. So I thought, it's so interesting to have those thoughts. Or how about the thought of, what if there's no world? I'm sure that we're not unique in that, but that is such a weird, like, if you just think about, okay, we're not here, we're not talking, nothing's here. It kind of gives you the creeps. It's just a weird thought,
You can get lost down that path of the why and the what and how does it all work and fit into place. It can get scary for sure.
Well, I'm glad you found your way back to God. I'm sure it's like opening a portal and just all these bright colors that you had kind of forgotten about or had gotten dulled are suddenly coming alive. And it's always a joy for one believer to know that someone else has either discovered or rediscovered that gift of faith. It is a gift. And then once and when we receive it, we want to give it to others. And I know I've kind of seen you sharing it in a fun way, but in a way that's serious too. So I see both of those components. So I do want to talk a little bit about the neurodivergent topic that we're going to be talking about today. I just want to hear about your journey. So to share about that, you said, that there's a connection with that question, that deep question you were asking. At what point did you start to realize that your brain wasn't typical, I guess we could say?
I guess that's a great question. Like, I feel like I've always known, and I'll share too, this is a fairly recent discovery for me. So I was officially diagnosed just a few months ago. But to your point, I think I've always wondered and been curious about how I think, how maybe I act or react differently than those around me. So as I mentioned, even as a child, being serious and quiet, introverted to an extreme. So off the spectrum, introverted.
Okay. Yep.
My mom has even shared, like, there would be times she would come in and I would be playing with Legos or something, and she'd come in and sit down and play with me, and I would literally turn around with my back to her so I could play alone and focus on what I was doing. And she would share, I was a little insulted at first when you would turn your back on me, but then over time would realize that I was just so in-depth focused on the things that I was doing that, even having somebody sitting with me could sometimes be a distraction. So growing up, being called shy or aloof or not a people person, but just somebody who, to your earlier point, needs decompression time, especially if there's a lot of interaction with people. So always grew up sort of leaning on that crutch as, oh, well, I'm an introvert, so that explains all of the things that are going on in my life. I will share that was exacerbated earlier this year. So I went through, what do they always say? Be careful what you wish for. So at the company that I worked for, I worked very hard for a promotion and to go for bigger and better and more impactful roles. And I got one. And that role, sort of took over my life. And it went from 5 days a week to 6 days a week to 7 days a week, 70 hours a week. And I, without realizing it, literally walked away from everything that wasn't my job. And that included spending time with family. That included my degree program that I mentioned earlier. That included church, because everything was about focusing on work. And this past summer, had a breakdown. I was diagnosed with severe depression, and just couldn't do it anymore. And I ended up having to take a leave of absence from my job for several weeks. But it was during that time, in talking to therapists and looking to get help, that it felt like the time was right for me to start to better understand how my brain is wired. And as I mentioned, had an official diagnosis of both ADHD and autism spectrum disorder, and came to realize that part of the breakdown I suffered is actually something called autistic breakdown, or autistic burnout, where it's not just the stress that you have from your occupation, it's the stress that's caused by having to mask and show up in a way that your brain's not wired to do on a regular basis without that ability to sort of decompress or get it or take a breath from what that is. So I had always been interested in neurodiversity anyway, even before my own personal diagnosis. And,
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. Because, I mean, we talked about it well before this
a while ago.
diagnosis of yours. Yeah. How did you get interested in it then?
Well, there are people, I have a few folks in my family that are on the spectrum and have other neurodiversity. So that, always interested me about it as well. And, I did some work at the company I work for with an employee resource group that's focused on neurodiversity. It just always struck me as these are folks who are challenged with things that nobody else can see. And I would see so often people would make judgments about these people without even fully understanding some of the things that they were struggling with.
And you were like tuned in. You kind of saw it. It seems like, right? You were thinking, but you don't know the whole picture. The fact that you were even able to be objective and to see that it hints maybe that you were intuitive about that because you understood. Maybe
I think you're right.
I don't know.
Yeah, I think that's definitely part of it. Is that once, like, if you're feeling those things, it's easier to intuit or empathize when somebody else is going through the same things. And it's I mean, the corporate world can be a challenge for people who are neurodiverse. Like, I'll give you a quick, but I think a good example. The term executive presence is one that you hear almost everywhere in the corporate world, where you reach a certain level and you need to have this mystical thing called executive presence. And what that looks like generally is you have to carry yourself a certain way. You have to sit very still and very focused and very calm. Make eye contact when you're talking to people. Talk and communicate in a very certain way. And as I hear myself list all those things to you, Roxanne, I think neurodiverse and neurodivergent people might be challenged with all of those. Like, I'm somebody, for example, who, when I'm talking to somebody, even if I'm on Zoom or on camera, I'm going to be rocking back and forth in my chair. That's just how, sort of stim. If I'm anxious or if I'm thinking, if I'm processing something deeply, I'm probably going to stare off to the side and to the ceiling. and somebody might look at that and say, well, you need some help with your executive presence because you look bored right now. Well, I'm not bored.
Mm.
I'm 6 steps ahead of where you are, but I'm just looking up at the
Mm.
ceiling to find it. So there's
Mm.
an image that I think some in the business world look for, is you have to fit this certain framed presence that exists that really excludes a lot of folks that might be neurodivergent.
Yeah, that's hard. I think one of the things about neurodivergency is that and I would say maybe I don't know. It is in my family, and so I've like assessed some of my own things too. I don't know where I fall in there, but I have certain things like I have to color code my to-do lists, and there's just different things that I would say maybe I have a little bit of maybe ADHD. I'm not sure. And just I don't know. I guess I'm still thinking about it,
Yeah.
but I know there is a genetic component to it. And so
Yes.
the fact that you had that, and I've even kind of like assessed, like looking back at my father, who was an alcoholic, and wondering, was that a way for him to, was he struggling with something like that? And that was his coping mechanism, I mean, he was a naughty little boy, got in trouble in school, I mean, there's some things that make me wonder, and maybe even have some compassion or a different look at looking back on his life and some of the struggles that he had, so yeah, but it's like, I think in general, they don't fit into, they, we, who, you, me,
Yeah.
into the cookie cutter sort of box that society, I guess in some ways necessarily has to have, but, it's also important when we think about the diversity of God's children, right? To make room for that, and that's one of the things I want to get into. Like,
Yeah.
where do the neurodivergent fit in, and how do we make this thing meld? How do we bring awareness? Can you share a little bit about what the project you were working on as far as work and bringing awareness? Was that what it
Yeah.
was? Is just a kind of, what was that?
It was for sure about awareness. But I think a lot of it too was just to help those who were neurodiverse know that they weren't alone. Because there's so many times where if you're neurodivergent that you just feel like nobody else is dealing with the same thing that you are. And you have to mask it. You have to hide it. You have to show up and find the person in the room who seems to be the most socially competent and try to mirror them. Try to mask by copying what somebody else is doing. And I've done that my whole life, Roxanne. Like, I've found the people around me that, they seem to know what's going on. They seem to have it figured out. So I'm going to be that person. I'm going to carry myself in that way. I'm going to talk in that way. I'm going to sit like they do. And in some cases, that's okay. But in some cases, it really gets in the way of allowing neurodivergent people to think and practice some of the superpowers that they actually have. It's also exhausting.
I was just going to say that sounds exhausting if you're
It's brutal.
having to be malleable to every situation. I mean, in a way that most people would just normally move through a day. You're constantly having to match up to those around you. I mean, that takes so much, it just takes so much energy.
It takes so much physical and emotional energy. It's just enormous because you're looking for the person that you can, like I said, that you can copy that seems to operate in the world that is socially acceptable. You somehow know down deep that that's not you, so you start to look for the folks that might be able to give you that part. But like you said, it's exhausting, and as I mentioned earlier, I truly think that's one of the things that led to my own breakdown last summer was, being in situations where not only am I working 7 days a week, but now I'm masking 7 days a week. Now I'm actually having to do all of these things that don't come naturally for me on a regular basis. It's too much.
The train wreck was in motion. It was just a matter of crashing.
That's right.
And kind of taking on the impossible. One of the things, so as I started researching this a little bit more and then ended up doing an article for the National Catholic Register about faith and neurodiversity, it was interesting seeing some of the comments. To be honest, I thought, okay, I feel like I'm getting a grasp on this and I want other people to understand and to share about this and talk to some people that were experts and had experienced it. But there were some negative comments about it, or just even comments like, okay, like what's causing this? Let's get to the root of it. Like,
Yeah.
is it video games and is it this? And it's like, it frustrated me because I felt like, okay, yeah, it's helpful to work on the cause. But right now, when I'm dealing with it in my own life and trying to grasp it, that's not really helpful right now. Like, you know what I mean? It's like, I want to help my loved ones, move through this world, and that finding out the cause right now, it's like, that's back there and that's for another time. But like right now, I just want to know how I can come alongside people that are struggling with this. So, what are your thoughts about that? About the misconceptions and how to break through that? And then we'll get into the faith part, but I just want to cover this first.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right. There are people who assume that those who are neurodivergent are this or that. They're rigid, they're selfish. Maybe they're just bad at social interactions. But I think a lot of that comes from, it's hard to see. Mental health challenges are invisible to everybody else. Like those who are in it, those who know that there's something different going on, you deal with it and feel it every second of your life. But if you're just sitting beside one of these people in the pews at church, you don't know. They just seem like a regular person sitting there. But that regular person sitting there might be feeling tremendous social anxiety just being in a church full of people. They might be, like myself, there will be times where I'm feeling the anxiety so much that the second that Mass is over, I'm up and out the door into my car. Because the thought of, interacting with and communicating with people is too much for that specific moment. Other times it's not. Other times it's okay.
Mm-hmm.
And I think part of it for those who aren't neurodivergent, and sometimes you'll hear them, folks talked to or described as neurotypical, instead of neurodivergent. There's also, I think, some disagreement on whether neurotypical is actually the right term either, only because what is typical? I think everybody has, something that is a little bit different about their brain and their brain processes. But those who are more neurotypical probably say, well, why is that guy running to his car at the end? Or how come we never see him for coffee and donuts? Is it because he feels like he's too good for us? Is he aloof? Is he this? Is he that? It's really easy to connect dots that don't exist in your brain, as opposed to, I think I want to ask. I think I want to talk to him. I think I want to see what his experience is. I'll give the deacon at my church, Deacon Jeff, a lot of credit. He's really good at that. And he's good at engaging me in ways that seek to understand as opposed to criticizing. So to use that same example that I just shared, Roxanne, he might say, hey, there are times where I'm looking forward to catching up with you after Mass, and then you're not there. Do you use that side entrance sometimes to go out to your car? Because what that does is it communicates to me, oh, he was looking to interact with me. He was looking to talk to me. And it's okay that I left, as opposed to a more critical perspective, which could be done, which is, well, why are you running out of church? Why are you escaping the first second you get? Why aren't you spending more time with? Instead of the why and the shoulds, it comes from a place of, seeking to understand in kindness and patience, instead of criticizing. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. And it begs this question that I should have asked before. What was your experience like going through school? did any of this come up? Because school is very much you sit down and you do what the teacher says.
Yeah.
Did you have any issues then?
Yeah, I did, and it's funny that you asked that too, because I was just I'm sharing a lot here, but that was one of the conversations I just had with my therapist, because as I'm going through this diagnosis, thinking back to childhood and school and realizing, how come nobody saw this? I mean, there's so many signs of just me seeking to sort of be alone, or not finding it easy to play with other kids at recess, or group work or group activities in classrooms. There were always times where I would sort of grit my teeth and make it through, but it really felt more like I was living small, like I was living in fear of being in situations that I wasn't prepared for. And I went through a lot of school just looking to get through the day and get back home, because that's where I was safe.
Right.
So if I had known earlier, right, then I think things maybe could have been different. But but everything happens for a reason. Timing happens for a reason.
So I have a child that hasn't been diagnosed, but I'm just, as a parent, I've wondered. There was a moment early on in this child's life, and where interactions were happening with peers, but this child was always doing something different. And I was like, why are they not melding with everyone? Like, what's wrong? And now I do wonder. And, it's just, you look at everything, like, and that's one of the things too, is it's always been, and the illuminations come and can help inform us and hopefully bring some relief and understanding. And it's too bad it takes so long sometimes for us to understand, but at the same time, God enters in when he does. And so, yeah. So, well, I want to take a little break here and do a pause, but we will be back with more matters of soul importance after this break to talk more about the faith community, and also just what you can do if you're, just stepping into a diagnosis like this or wondering about it. Todd might have some insight for you. So be right back after this break.
Get 3 months of local news for just 99 cents a month. You'll get unlimited access to the news you need to stay engaged and connected to your community. Visit inforum.com/subscribe now to get 3 months of local news for only 99 cents a month.
Welcome back to Matters of Soul Importance. I have Todd Charette here as my guest this morning. He is all the way in New Hampshire. And Todd, I have to admit, I thought maybe you'd have a little bit of a East Coast accent, but I'm not hearing anything. You must be in an area that wasn't affected. I don't know.
I don't know why.
Sure there's different areas.
I don't know why, but there are lots of folks in New Hampshire or Massachusetts or Maine that have really strong accents, but I just have never had one. I don't know why that is. Some words, probably.
You could totally live in North Dakota. So, and is Charette, is that Italian?
It's French.
Or what?
It's French.
Oh, French.
Yep.
Okay. Oh, yeah, of course. Yeah. And I'm my maiden name is French. And I ask because, well, there's a teacher's aide growing up. I grew up on the Lakota reservation in Northeast Montana, but we had Miss Charette was one of our, so that makes sense because there was a lot of French mixture on our reservation. So anyway, yeah. So I that's the last time I've heard that name was way back when I was like in first grade. So, but anyway, well, yeah, we're talking about neurodivergency, and you have shared a little bit about your journey. Yeah. There's also some positives about it, and I really want to bring that out because, yes, it can be a hindrance like anything, like even introversion, right? Like it can be, people can misunderstand that and think that you're like antisocial or whatever, but it's really a need that you have to not expend yourself, and it's a real thing. So what are some of the blessings, I guess, of dealing with this? And you've only really had the diagnosis 2 months, but you've been thinking
Sure.
about it longer than that.
Yeah,
Share some of the good things so people can see, like, we need all these people in the world, right?
we do. And it's, they're gifts from God, they're superpowers. I see it every day with the neurodivergent people that I have in my life or those that I work with. I see people who truly excel at creating things. They're very creative, coming up with a vision or a strategy. And I'm generalizing a bit here. Now, of course, those who are neurodivergent may have, as we all do, different gifts and different strengths. But I tend to see folks that are really good at coming up with strategic visions. So I'll speak for myself. Like, I think I'm a vision person, but if you ask me to come down 3 or 4 levels and come up with a tactical plan on how that vision is going to be executed, it's going to take me 3 years to do that. That's just not my strength. But the
Right.
vision, I can make creative connections to work that's going on across the business that other people aren't able to make. I used to work with a gentleman that was on the spectrum who was very similar, where he would literally be called into meetings where folks couldn't figure out how to, what step to take next or how to execute or deliver an initiative. And he would look at it for 5 minutes and he would come up with, here's how this connects to this, here's how that connects to that. Just immediately be able to make that type of creative connection. Part of that's because of pattern recognition, which those with autism are generally pretty good at, and ADHD too. So those with ADHD, although sometimes we have trouble with focus or motivation, like trying to get in to focus on one thing instead of 11 things. Once you're in it,
Right.
though, you will find people with ADHD delivering so much really good work. So there's always, it's the flip side of the same coin. Another superpower that I always found was really interesting, and this one has sort of a good and a bad to it. But part of growing up neurodivergent might make folks hyper vigilant and hyper perceptive of the situations around them. Part of that's a defense mechanism. Part of that is I want to make sure I'm safe in this situation. So I'm very careful to watch and understand and intuit the people around me. Is this person look upset? Does this person look happy? Did their body language change? Did their tone of voice change? But what that ends up meaning is you get to be really good at reading people. You get to be really good at understanding how somebody's feeling and what they might be going on or might be going on in their life. I will share, I used to have a boss that years ago, many years ago, she would bring me to meetings because she knew that I would be able to tell her how the people were really feeling about what was being discussed as opposed to what they were sharing out loud. So that after
So you could
I
read the
could read the
room.
room, I could be able to know
Yeah.
this person, she said she was on board with what you presented, but I don't think so. When you mentioned these 2 specific things, she seemed a little agitated or she seemed a little upset about that. So you might want to follow up with her. And she would, and she would find out that that was absolutely right, that those were the things that the person was off kilter on. So lots of those things we wouldn't normally think about. We think about the challenges a lot, but there's a lot of the gifts and superpowers that come along with being neurodivergent as well.
Absolutely. We're not all supposed to be the same. When I did that article, I started it off. I'd heard an interview with Kristalina Everett talking about, and I think it was with Raymond Aurora, talking about Thomas Edison
Yes.
was neurodivergent. And things didn't go so well in school. He was, the teachers just kind of gave up on him, and his mom took him in and homeschooled him. And wow, think about it. I'm looking at a lamp right now in front of me that has a light bulb. That's so many things that he was part of because of that neurodivergent brain. And what a blessing those people and situations and innovations have been to our world. And we don't even know. Some have never been identified as
Right.
that, right? But probably a lot of artists and creative people. And so, yeah.
Well, there's a lot, just real quick, there's a lot of corporations and companies that are actively looking to hire neurodivergent individuals because they know there are skills that they bring that don't exist in the larger population or exist in much smaller numbers in the larger population. So I think we're getting to a point where people are starting to understand what thinking differently and communicating differently and processing differently means beyond just the challenges, and that there's actually a lot of goodness that comes from folks who are wired this way.
Very cool. That is very hopeful. How did your faith play a part even recently? It sounds like you were kind of meandering away from that as you've worked so hard to put all your energy into this job that you'd sought out and now was kind of overwhelming you. Obviously, I'm assuming that now you're working your way back. So tell us a little bit about the beauty of faith in your life and how that has been a healing component for you.
It's been it's truly been like coming home. Not just going back to mass and going to adoration, which I'll be going to this afternoon, but it's just feeling the love of Jesus again. And it was always there. I just was turned away from it. I was just focused on, all of the things that took me away from, focused on the one thing that took me away from all of the things that really mattered. And God, of course, being, top on the list. And being back, I just feel that strength. I feel the belonging and the joy that comes along with it. And then it also makes me think too, Roxanne, is it makes me look at everybody around me differently too. And, how many times do we sit right next to the same people in front of us or behind us in the pews, and maybe we know their names, maybe we don't, maybe months, years, these same people are sitting around us. And sometimes you might see them and think, do they look off today? Do they look sad? What's going on in their world? And it makes me wonder how many other folks are dealing with some of those silent challenges, whether it's depression or anxiety or neurodiversity, something that is getting in the way of their life that I could talk to them about, that I could perhaps help them with. I feel like it was a blessing for me to find my way back to the church, and that was God helping me get there. And I'd love to be able to help other people who are suffering with mental health challenges find their way back to church too, because it is hard sometimes when you're suffering depression to put your shoes on or even get out of bed, never mind go to mass. So that's part of what I'm thinking through and processing right now.
Isn't it good too to know, and I think this is for anyone, that God has known from the beginning and he understands our hearts and our intentions and our obstacles. So regardless of when or if or whatever anyone was diagnosed or has dealt with a neurodivergent brain, God knew from the beginning, and he, that's just such a solace, I think. Like, he knows us better than we know ourselves. And what a supreme blessing that even on our worst days, like, he understands it all, every little minute. It kind of blows your mind that he knows you better than you know yourself, but it's such a comfort. Especially, I would say this, I think from what I've observed and experienced, the misunderstandings surrounding the neurodivergent brain, I think there's maybe one of the worst parts about it, and I would say this comes from the evil one, is this idea of you're different, you don't fit in, you can't act like other people, you don't know how to be social, all of those haunting things that come. And God doesn't speak to us that way. So thank God for that other voice that can enter in and affirm us and affirm our differences and not see them as, to see them as superpowers, like you said. Like, that's so beautiful that companies are starting to see that and want that kind of diversity in their company, because it is a gift. It is a gift. So those of us who love people with neurodivergent brains also, like, I've always appreciated people in my life that saw it rather than the people that cast aside the loved ones in my life, because that means so much to me as a mother, as a loved one, to know that there's just certain people that picked up on it and loved and appreciated it,
And I think it's
anyway.
important too to keep in mind, like I try to come from give the benefit of the doubt that those who don't see it or understand it initially, come from a place of kindness that they don't know yet. Maybe they haven't experienced it on their own. They don't have people around them that, are openly sharing it with them, so that they don't have that experience. So I try to come from that place of kindness and patience. But I think this is the brilliance in what you're doing with this podcast, is I think part of continuing to talk about it and get it out there will help open up people's eyes to what this really is. It's funny because you mentioned the perception that some people might have about neurodivergent, that they're not good with social interactions or social cues. I heard a really interesting analogy recently that those who are neurodivergent aren't good with social cues because we don't take in too many. We don't see it. We can't see the social cues, the social interactions, and because of that, we're lost. But in reality, we take in too much. And the analogy is, if you were to have a camera and you wanted to go outside at night and take pictures of the night sky and the stars, you need to have special settings or maybe even special film to make sure you can capture all of those unique details of the night sky. Something really sensitive to pick up on all the details. But if you were to take that same camera, same settings, same film to the beach on a sunny day and take pictures, it would be totally blown out. It would be all white light. You wouldn't be able to see anything but just brightness on the pictures. Now, you wouldn't say the film or the camera is broken because it's picking up all of the color, all of the light, all of the nuances and details. It's actually picking up everything. It's so sensitive that it was able to pick up everything that was going on the sunny day. But that film was made for the night sky, not for the beach. And that's exactly how neurodiverse brains work. We are super sensitive. We pick up on every single detail. Sometimes it doesn't feel like we do, but we do. We pick up on all of those details in a way that sometimes it makes it too much for us. Sometimes you're getting all of the sensory overwhelmed that you get from that film that is at the beach on a sunny day, as opposed to taking pictures of those stars at night. So that was an analogy I heard that I thought sort of brings it to light for those that maybe don't fully comprehend or haven't had the opportunity to comprehend how a neurodiverse brain processes things.
Wow, yeah, that's a really interesting thing to ponder and take in. I'm wondering too, as you're talking, how your family has received your diagnosis. I don't know if maybe there's other people in your family. Well, you said there were. Has that been difficult? Has it been a breakthrough in a good way? I know it has been in ours. Like when we started making some of these connections, it helps. There's a relief there to kind of start to understand. And there does seem to be more mercy and understanding. How has that played out in your family of origin, especially? I'm thinking, and then beyond that with family and friends. How have you navigated that?
It's been interesting. So lots of love and support from those around me. It's interesting. Part of my neurodiversity is being more private and more closed up. So even sort of sharing that with the family, like brother and sister, and my mom, was it took me a little bit of time before I got comfortable doing that. But but ultimately everybody's so supportive. And like I said, I have some others in the family that are also on the spectrum. So it's not, it doesn't feel so new or so different that, folks aren't sure how to process it. I will say,
Right.
like, my oldest friend that I have from high school, when I told him, he's like, I could have told you in high school that you were autistic. So I think
Ah,
it's interesting that some of the perception is, oh yeah, I kind of always noticed that something was different, um, but no, it wasn't talked about. So it was just interesting looking back to see how people reacted or didn't react to things that happened over time. It's been interesting.
I don't know if you've gotten into any of the science of it, with the brain science at all. Have you explored that at all to kind of, I guess now I'm kind of going back to like what is going on in the neurodivergent brain? How does this happen? Is there a way to kind of explain that to people who maybe are saying, wait a minute, what is neurodivergent? We haven't really like defined it, I guess. Is there a way to encapsulate like kind of what it is? I mean, you kind of did just now with that visual, but what's going on in the brain, would you say? And maybe you can't say that, but
Yeah, I mean, just at the high level, I think the easiest way I define neurodiversity is that brains work in a variety of different ways, and that affects communication. That affects the way that a brain processes information, and can affect the way that that people act and react in certain situations as well. Why I usually try to keep it at that altitude is because once you start to click down into all of the different types of neurodiversity, we've talked about ADHD and autism spectrum disorder, but there's OCD, there's dyslexia, there's dyscalculia. There are just hundreds of different ways that people's brains process differently. And I will share, like, Father Matthew Schneider, who's an autistic priest who's written some great books and has some great podcasts. He recently started a group called Autistic Catholic, which is a support group for
Mm,
Catholics on the spectrum. But he's always I like what he says: if you've met an autistic, or if you've met one autistic, you've met one autistic. Meaning you can't judge
mm,
somebody on the spectrum by somebody else that you know on the spectrum. Everybody's going to be a little bit different. There's always the generalization that I think people get from the media or from movies or TV shows that, well, if you're autistic, that must mean you're really good at math. I'm awful at math. So it doesn't necessarily always work like that. There's a lot of differences in how it shows up in different individuals and in different brains. But like I said, it comes down to the way you think, the way you process, the way you communicate, and I think maybe most importantly, the way you perceive the world around you changes too with neurodiversity.
mm. What would you say to a family that is just now discovering this? They're just opening up to this journey. What kind of advice might you have for them to gently sort of guide them into the entry point as someone who's been there
I
yourself?
think have an open mind. Maybe more importantly, have an open heart. Realize that you're not alone. That there's large percentage of the population is operating with brains that are neurodiverse in one way or another, and that there are so many resources out there. So, um, science resources, like, you can go deep, like you said, on brain science and figuring out causes and genetics and who else in the family might have these types of things. And you can go deep on the faith side too. So this is really um, a good way to get closer to God and closer to the church community, because, as I mentioned earlier, it's just a good way to try to reach out to others who might be dealing with some of these same challenges in a way that you can accompany them through their journey, whether it's at church or at home or wherever they might need you. But be brave, because there's lots of help, lots of support out there. And of course, Jesus is always by your side. He never, ever leaves you. He is always right there beside you.
I think of like the sheep, the shepherd, the good shepherd, looking for that 99th
Yes.
one. And I think maybe sometimes a neurodivergent can feel like the lost sheep, like out there somewhere, and Jesus will drop everything and change the world if he has to go after the one who's being maybe misunderstood or whatever. And that's so beautiful that we are thought of that way in such an individual way, do you have any, like, I'm wondering about you, Todd, like you have such a heart for reaching out and doing something. Do you have any thoughts about what you might do now that you've been officially diagnosed? And I mean, you're still in the journey, you're still learning, you're still going through therapy. We all need therapy
Yes.
every once in a while. But are you starting to kind of like have some yearnings for how this might play out, like as far as what God's will is for you and him having revealed this to you at this time? I don't know. I'm just curious if you have any dreams about how you might step forward into this and help others.
I mentioned Father Matthew Schneider and some of the work that he's done to reach out to other autistics who happen to be Catholic. I'd love to spend time sort of following in his footsteps a bit, and whether that's something local, here in the New England area, or maybe even, a podcast that helps deal, full time with faith and neurodiversity is something that I've been thinking about as well. But I'm still discerning that, Roxanne. I'm not sure that I'm fully, God has fully taken me to where he wants me to help in this situation yet.
Sure. Well, I guess we could circle back now. I usually ask the question again as we sum things up. And so as we start to close out here, how would you now answer that question again? What gifts do the neurodivergent bring to God's kingdom? I know you've already answered that question, but maybe something else comes to mind, or you can give it sort of a cap on it. What are some of those gifts, and how should we receive that?
I think maybe I'll flip it around and look at it the other way. I think the gift that neurodivergence can bring to those who are maybe more atypical in the way that they think, or neurotypical, is it gives us all an opportunity to try to better understand each other and seek to really come from a place of kindness to understand what's going on in somebody's life and in somebody's brain. And it's easy to go to Mass once a week, and you go in and you say hello and you give the sign of the peace, and then afterwards you say goodbye and you leave Mass. It's another thing to pause and truly see the people around you and look for ways that you can reach out and better understand them. And I think you'll find that some of them are probably maybe struggling with some of these silent challenges that we've talked about during our time together, Roxanne.
Yeah, you're so on target with the physical, limitations versus the mental, and how we can't always see those. And I think maybe part of it is sometimes people just don't know. Don't
Right.
know. And if they did know, they wouldn't know what to say. But maybe just to encourage, just awareness, I think. And again, that's what I want to do, because my heart opened up big when this became something that I had to face in my family. And at that point, then it's just you want others to have the same compassion that you're developing, and you do really have a chance to see
Yes.
God's heart in all of this, and to trust that he, again, has known all along, and he will bring all into his fold. So, anything else, Todd, before we close up today? I've really appreciated this conversation. I'm looking forward to sharing it with others and just bringing that awareness forward. But is there anything else that was on your heart that you really wanted to tackle and we didn't get to it?
The last thing I would mention is that if there's anybody listening to the podcast that needs somebody to talk to or wants to talk to further about neurodiversity, I'm all over social media. So feel free to message me on Facebook or Instagram, and I'm happy to connect to talk about your own journey.
Awesome. I will include those
Perfect.
some links to that in the show notes so people can get in touch with you, Todd. But it's been a pleasure, and boy, you're very articulate, and I really appreciate you again being on today and talking about this topic. So God bless you.
God bless
and we'll
you,
be
Roxanne.
in touch. What gifts do the neurodivergent bring to God's kingdom? In the article I wrote for the National Catholic Register, Driven by Love, Mothers on a Mission Ensure the Neurodiverse Are Counted Among Christ's Flock, I began with one of the most famous neurodivergent folks in our history, Thomas Edison, who likely had attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, or ADHD, along with being deaf, and whose mother, an educator, fueled his strengths to foster the brilliance that others had overlooked. As Aurora said in an online interview, God blessed that mother who recognized it early, fed his curiosity, and gave him science manuals alongside novels, noting that Edison's liabilities ended up being the blessings and the beginning of the world's greatest inventor. Jane Indergaard, a friend from Fargo who is on the National Board of Children and Adults with Attention Deficit Hyperactivity Disorder, said that the myths of ADHD, including that it is caused by bad parenting, too much sugar, or too many video games, can be dangerous, noting that this well-studied brain-based biological disorder can also take a toll on the soul. At one point in our interview, she wondered about the neurodiverse who walk away from the faith. Is it because their brains process information differently? Certainly there's a component of that, but a lot of it is just that they don't feel part of their faith community. Ouch. If this is the case, we need to take note as believers of Christ, because as Indergaard said, modeling Christ by being welcoming always enriches the community. Together, we all make up this beautiful body of Christ, she told me. If we don't let the hand be part of the body, we're missing out. Indergaard also mentioned that neurodiverse people often experience greater life stressors than even those with chronic conditions, in part because, as Todd also noticed in our interview today, their challenges are more hidden, with symptoms being more behavioral than physical. Dr. Brian Herbal, a Christian psychiatrist from Bismarck, North Dakota, shared with me that we have to recognize there are differences in nature, and you don't try to force people onto a narrow path. Adding, people come to the table with brains wired differently, but can still make positive contributions, even if in a non-traditional way. Both Herbal and Indergaard agreed that while we can't have targeted interventions for everyone in the room, for those willing to try, the resources are there. Indergaard added, it's a tall call to have to rethink our priorities and what's really important, but worth it. Well, while we can't solve all this in one sitting, I do hope that Todd's sharing today helped give a face to what neurodiverse really means as a lived experience, and perhaps provoked ideas of ways the Christian body can come alongside those whose brains do not work in a typical way, recognizing the very excellent gifts they might bring those of us willing to receive. In our next episode, we'll hear from a woman who has found a way to integrate body and soul exercise in an edifying, Christ-centered way as we ask, do Christian-based stretching exercises even exist? For those uncertain about stretching and exercise practices with spiritual components, this will be a must-hear. Until then, don't lose sight of the light.